Welcome, everybody. My name is Sylvia Laudien-Meo, and I am welcoming you to our new talk of today about the glasswork, the fabulous stained glass or opalescent glasswork by Comfort Tiffany and John La Farge. So both of these artists are very, very prolific. They work in many different mediums and create wonderful artworks. But we want to look today just at their window work and compare it a little bit. Both artists are contemporaries. They both claim to have invented this opalescent glass, or what was also called the American glass during this Victorian era, the Gilded Age, or the American aesthetic movement, also it is called. I can go forward to two nice comparisons here for us to start off with, because I wanted you to just place it also in time. Like this opalescent glass, this new fashion of glass windows, very decorative, became so fashionable by the end of the 19th century. So it's the post-Civil War era. And I wanted you to think about how this is also a time where in the big cities you have this rising wealth, incredible wealth, to have millionaire families in we're going to look at Boston and New York specifically, and those families are building enormous mansions also in Newport, Rhode Island, for instance, and spending fortunes to have them decorated. They also travel very much, so it's the time of travel where people go. The wealthy people go travel to Europe, travel all over the world, and so they know different cultures. They learn about different cultures. They bring artifacts back home. They decorate their houses with these collections. But also the artists travel and they learn about or familiarize themselves with all these different styles and fashion. And so here, for instance, Japanese art is becoming very important and influential to their work. Here, Tiffany and La Farge in particular, or also medieval art, like the mosaics of Ravenna, for instance, Islamic art, or textures, all this wealth of different textures and colors influences their investigation of this new glass to create really illuminated paintings. They're all like very painterly. They become increasingly more three-dimensional, these windows, and very, very innovative, as you will see. Yes, so think about post-Civil War era. Think about this interest in collecting, in traveling, exploring the influence of different non-Western cultures. A very high interest in nature also. Think about how this is the time of romanticism. There's the Hudson River School, for instance, paintings that investigate nature themes, all these different species of flowers and plants and animals, for instance, but also a certain amount of symbolism and the idea of finding your God in nature. We will see that also in their window work. Think about Art Nouveau, for instance, this new fashion, the arts and crafts movement, Art Nouveau in France, the Vienna workshops. They traveled also to England, of course. There is the Glasgow, the School of Arts and Crafts, the pre-Raphaelites in England that have an intensified also interest in religious motifs. All of this we will find in their artwork. So just like to frame it a little bit in the background. What is this opalescent glass? What is the technique here? This is a traditional glass that I'm showing you right now, medieval glass from the 13th century. And what's different about it here, what you can see is that the scene here of the king on his horseback with the two companions is created out of transparent glass sheets, but then the details are all painted on with enamel. So all the details of the draperies, the crown, the face, the architecture surrounding it is all painted on. This is something that La Farge and Tiffany want to get away with. So they're going to try and create like this new kind of glass, opalescent glass, that really Tiffany or La Farge is the one that patented this new glass first at the beginning of 1880. A year later, 1881, Tiffany gets a patent, but his patent focuses more on the construction of these glasses, and specifically the layering of it, because you will see how these panes of glass, right, that are highly textured. I'm going to show you different examples of it. Opalescent glass, now it's not clear, it's not see-through. It has all these different patterns and textures on it, but it could also be layered. In the windows themselves, it's not ever just like one sheet of glass, but there's different layers. And that was something Tiffany really explored a lot. This example here is from the Neustadt collection. So these are all objects that were salvaged from Tiffany's factory in Corona when it was torn down. And so it's still, you can still visit and see this collection. Opalescent glass before Tiffany and La Farge focused on it was only used for tableware, so for objects that you would use, like bowls or pitchers and such things, but it was not produced in sheets. So that was something new, because they pushed for it to use it for their windows. And so here you can see like all these different types of textures that they developed. So there's this streamer glass here that has all these lines in itself, different a variety of tones. It's not just green or brown or yellow, but it has like several hues, and it has these lines inside, so that makes it perfect to be used to depict, for instance, foliage or landscape motifs in the background. This kind of glass here is called confetti glass or foliage glass, and it's made out of several layers of fractured glass. So you could blow like paper thin bubbles of one color, crash them, shatter them, and then roll over another colored glass so that it picks it up, and you have like, yes, it really looks mostly like confetti, and it's perfect also for depicting foliage or like nature motifs. Like here on the right side, I'm showing you a close-up of a landscape window that's the inside of a forest, and you can see this confetti glass, or here fractured streamer glass is also this variation, which has both. It has the fractures and it has the lines, and so this would be cut to depict here the inside of a forest. For that it is perfect. There's also ring model glass, which is created by localized heat treated opacification and crystallization. So here you have like these circular kind of, almost, they look like oil stains to me. So they're circular motifs rather than lines. And those are also perfect for organic motifs like fruit, vegetables, or leaves. And then you have spotted glass here, or the mottled pattern, which is more streamlined. It has like these lines in it, and they could be used very well for water, for sky, for anything that kind of has like a flowy motif, because it has these lines, running lines in it. Another term is rippled glass, and this is created with a tool, with the roller actually, so that you can roll onto like this still liquid glass. And then you have actually texture that you can feel, but when you use it inside the glass, it could be used for details like sheep's wool, for instance, feathers, water, and you can imagine how the light will shine through it in very interesting ways and create like a play of shadow and light. Feather glass has like these rows of small V-shaped furrows, and they are perfect to depict feathers, for instance, here in angels' wings, or in animals also. Whatever, this type of details also has quite a bit of movement in itself. Drapery glass can be used either for drapery, so for clothing, for the figures depicted in these windows, or also for the blossoms or leaves. So it's pretty thick, three-dimensional, and in itself creates already an interesting play of shadow and light. And there's also jewel glass, and that can have different thickness, different patterns, and could be set into the window frame, like by a circular metal frame, for instance. So it looks very much like the gem on a ring, or like a piece of jewelry. And that, of course, will have a very interesting shine and play of light as the sunshine hits it from the outside. So can you see that here? Favre glass was patented by Tiffany in 1892, but it's used by both artists, and it's very iridescent. So it's made by mixing different colors, colored glass together. And so it has like these rainbow hues that shine through a glass that looks mostly like pearl mud or the inside of a shell, like whitish, but it really shimmers in all these rainbow colors. So it's perfect also for very cool light effects. Right? And here there's layering. Like here, for instance, if you look at the yellow star on the right side, you can see that it's in the back, hidden behind like a layer of a more transparent whitish kind of glass paint. So here it's more apparent, but in many areas of these windows, the artist will use several layers, 2 or several layers of glass, so that the colors actually mix in your eyes, or it's mixed by the sunshine shining through it and in your eye, rather than in the one paint itself. So it's very similar also to the technique of the Impressionist painters that would paint by using small brush strokes of pure color that you mix or the observer then mixes in the eye, right? So it's a fresh mix through your vision. You know. The framing is also interesting because here, instead of like these rigid metal frames that you had in the traditional medieval stained glass windows that were painted on, here now you can have smaller pieces of glass, and they can be framed by like the soft copper and then soldered together, so that you have a combination. Then this very soft metal will not be visible to the eye from far away. But also sometimes there is a play with the metal, like here on the left side, you can see how it's pulled over the glass pane. So the metal itself could also be used in a more creative, decorative way. Like here in this magnolia tree window, for instance, the metal frames each petal, but then it also creates the lines of the magnolia tree. So it's functional as well as depictive, the metal. But then there's also something called the cloisonné technique. So here, John La Farge talks about it, for instance, how he's using like these very, very thin filaments of metal, right, like this copper, to fuse together glass panes. And there could be so many small ones, like he says, they could place them on the nail of the little finger to create a very detailed and still quite luminous depiction of a face, for instance, rather than using enamel paint, which makes it dull again, because you add it, like you cover, the transparency of the window. So it remains more luminous, your image, if you use this technique. Yeah. But both artists, they're both painters, both, continue in their practice to also, paint oil paintings or mural paintings, watercolor. La Farge is very much the forefront of the American mural painting movement, and also watercolors. So they also use some painting in the details, specifically the faces. Yeah. Once there are the prep work for these glass windows is very often made of watercolor, and they're very often super specific, so that the people in the workshop that execute these windows will then know what to pay attention to and what kind of glass to find and to cut. There is then a life site carton, like you see on the left side. You can see the life site carton from which stencils will be created, and those stencils then can be used to cut the glass panes to install in the window. And for the installation, for the assembly of the window, they use light easels. So the window pane is created against the background of light, and so you can apply first the cut out window panes with wax, assemble them, make sure you find the very perfect sheets of glass, put them together, and then when it's perfect, then you can add the final lead to make it permanent. Yeah. So in my talk, I will first look at some of the secular windows, and then we will look at the ecclesiastical windows. So they have a bit different interests, but there is overlaps for sure. I'm going to start with John La Farge, and this is one of the very first opalescent glass windows that he created here for Henry Marcon, and that was for his mansion in Newport, Rhode Island. Of course, you know, he lived in Rhode Island. He studied in with William Morris Hunt in Rhode Island. So he's, even though as a New Yorker who, you know, started off in Greenwich Village and had a studio there, also had a strong foothold in Rhode Island. And so this is where this window was. And wanted to draw your attention to the framing also, because I find with John La Farge's work, it's interesting to see how he plays with this idea of a frame. Traditionally, stained glass windows, like if you think of medieval glass, they were always flat, and they were supposed to be like colorful extensions of the wall, right? So bring light and color into the interior, not so much three-dimensional windows. Both of these artists now, La Farge and Tiffany, will push for more three-dimensional effects in their windows. I find it always very interesting with La Farge how he plays, though, with this connection between architecture and the idea of a painting, a three-dimensional painting. So here there are like 4 different frames around the center image of these flowers, the peonies in the wind, right? But then, so the frames will relate more to the walls of the building itself, right? So they could be like a window frame. They can also be like a picture frame. You can see both in that, right? But then the peonies, they're actually outside, and you're made to understand that because there is wind, there's like movement there. So he chooses like this very, very busy, streamlined blue sheet of glass for the background, so that you really feel like there's, you know, you can almost feel the air move. And then of course you see also these leaves, the leaves of the flowers, how they're bent over to the left. So you understand that there's an outside scene. This is not like a still life inside the room or like flowers standing on a niche inside the house, but they're outside more. You faintly can also see kind of water and hills maybe in the background. And so he's using a whole variety of different sheets of glass. You can see each area has very different colors, but also textures to them. This very busy streamlines for the background sky, but then there's also like a thicker kind of glass for the peonies themselves. There's kind of like the spotted glass on the what looks like the golden frame. So there's a huge variety of you know, transparencies and colors and textures that he's using here. This window is kind of different. It's figurative. There's two young women depicted here in these windows that make a pair. They depict morning and evening, so they're kind of symbolic figures. They also are like sculptures, almost standing on a little pedestal. So here you have again an interest in a architectural aspect. So you can envision them almost like as if they're maybe garden sculptures outside your window, right? Even though it's flat in the background, it has like this floral web motif in the back that maybe is like a bush with berries, but it's pretty flat. There's no three-dimensional aspect. There is quite a bit of, you know, painterly modeling of the clothing, though, the draperies. And then also you can see how these very youthful, beautiful faces are very finely depicted. The woman depicting morning is looking out towards like the new day, to the rising sun, maybe, where the woman on the right side, she's depicting evening. So she's reading, right? She's doing an activity that you're rather, you know, be doing at night. You know. So where was this house here? It was commissioned for Arabella Worsham, and her house was on the same spot where now the Museum of Modern Art's Sculpture Garden is located. And so she was the mistress of a railroad magnate, Carlos Huntington, and very, very, very fashionable, had a keen sense of what was fashionable at the time. And so she commissioned John La Farge to create these windows for her bedroom, but her entire house was very fashionable. So she really employed all these interior designers, fashionable interior designers of the time, to create like the wallpaper, the stenciling, the fabrics, the light fixtures, the woodwork, the furniture, and it was quite extravagant. I don't have an image of these windows in place, but they were in her bedroom. So that's the upper image. This whole the interiors are still intact. The bedroom is at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts now. This is her hometown, and the dressing room is here in New York City at the Metropolitan Museum. So you can see both of these interiors intact, because they really, that's also important to understand, that these glass windows, they were really mostly conceived to be part of like a holistic interior, not, as single works of art. And so John La Farge also got the commission to work on the mansion of William H. Vanderbilt on Fifth Avenue, here the Triple Palace. And you will see how he created here in the staircase, this large staircase, he created 3 huge stained glass windows for this staircase that really celebrate the Vanderbilt's family's wealth and success. And so here it's called the fruits of commerce, right? This is the railroad magnate's family, Cornelius Vanderbilt, his children. And so here in these mansions, also they're entertaining, and so they are celebrating their success, their rise in society. And so here you can see the center figure sitting again in a very interesting, complex architectural setting, like by the water. Like you can see how there's like this, like this. It's hard to see what it actually is. It's like the outside of a building, maybe on the rim of the river where boats are arriving, and there's this figure representing commerce with a Mercury staff in her arms, and she's receiving all of this wealth. They're bringing her fish, cornucopia filled with fruit and vegetables, maybe grain on the left side. So all of these successes there. So horse all the way on the upper left side, a winged horse actually that might depict beauty, right? Like a Pegasus. And here you can see, it's a huge composition, very finely drawn painting, I want to say, right? But it's glass, of course. And you can see how he's using this variety of glass, like for the shields, for instance, of the boats. You can see these, the jeweled circular glasses, where the draperies have these streamlined glasses, very painterly kind of depictions. And so each area has the perfect choice of texture and color. Another window in that staircase of the Vanderbilt mansion is this one here, hospitality and prosperity. So on the left side, you have hospitality with underneath like a trellis with drooping grapes. Also this very busy, lively sky with the clouds, with clouds floating by. On the right side, you have this young woman representing prosperity, also with this huge cornucopia filled with fruit and vegetables, all bringing them or celebrating here the host and the hostess in the center of the composition. Very rich. The Ames Webster Mansion in Boston has a beautiful window. Also here you can see the inside of this mansion that also has a glass dome, and it has wall paintings and very intricately carved woodwork. And for this mansion, he created these 2 outstanding windows that depict peonies, again, these flowers, and peacocks, right? So I love here on the left side, you can see the whole setting, how it's again quite architectural. It's like a window frame with the little trellis at the bottom, so that you can feel like, oh, this is the window frame, actually very finely carved. And you're looking outside into this beautiful landscape with the peonies and a peacock sitting right on it. And again, like a very a busy moving kind of sky with the streamlined streamer glass, right? It's a busy kind of background. And then at the bottom, you see more like these greenish hues that depict water and hills. So maybe a landscape, like a very peaceful, beautiful landscape, so that you can imagine, even though you're in Boston, outside you're looking at this peaceful landscape outside. Here's a detail of the feathers. So they're done with this jewel glass. They really have like thick gems sitting in it, in these frames, right? So you can imagine when the sunshine hits these glasses, that it's fractured throughout the room and really like glistening and shining, and having like these all these moving effects also in the inside of the room. And so there's a second variation, a second window to this pair that has the similar architectural frame, or seemingly architectural frame, but then a different kind of a peacock and landscape to boot. There's also a peacock there on the ground. Do you see one is sitting up on the, oh, there's actually three peacocks, two peacocks on the tree, and then one is at the bottom looking kind of back and up at his companions there. Yeah, so it's a quite busy window with lots of details to uncover the longer you look at it. And I'm sure depending on how the light shines through it, one area or the other is more illuminated and becomes more clear. And here's, just an example of a Chinese Qing Dynasty painting on paper that definitely inspired John La Farge. He traveled a lot. He traveled throughout Europe, but he also traveled far east. He was very much into Japanese culture and Asian culture in general, and introduced that here very strongly in the United States. I love also like here these a little bit more modest homes. Maybe here this mansion for Herbert Pratt in Brooklyn that has also this theme of hospitality. So here it's just one glass, right? One glass window that is placed in the staircase. And I love how it works here with this architecture, because you can see on the photograph on the lower left, right, that it was placed right in the middle of the staircase. But then the staircase kind of continues in this glass window. So hospitalitas is coming towards you. She's dropping these beautiful flowers to welcome you into the home. But you have you have the impression that the space, the actual architectural space of the mansion, continues within this window, right? Like there's a continuity here that makes it quite interesting. And then this is I had shown you the close-up of this, also the cloisonné technique. So here's a very, very finely designed figure with all these draperies in her clothing, but then also this multitude of little glass pieces that describe this very youthful, beautiful, smiley face coming towards you. Yeah. Another window that here he designed for Washington Thomas in Massachusetts is the theme is here the infant Bacchus. And I find it very interesting to note that here he based the scene on photographs, actually. So he did a whole series, or he was not the photographer was Cox, George Collins Cox, and Lisa Stillman is the woman here with the son of La Farge's friend, Rodman Gilder. And there's different scenes that were photographed, but in the window itself, the boy is sitting on her shoulders, representing the infant Bacchus, this god of wine and hospitality. Also, you can see his head is surrounded by these grapes, and she's very tenderly looking up towards him. And just like you can see that there is a genius of an artist here at hand, how he composes these two figures, and the smoothness of these bodily movements and the tenderness of of the visual connection is quite amazing. And then also the landscape behind them is very beautifully rendered. And then around it, though, you see very complex architecture again, right? With these two columns and the tablature at the bottom and the floral design on top. So it also really blends with the building itself. Yeah, so that it's image, but also blending into the architecture. This window here in the Bliss House, that's just off Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, is quite astounding also. not only the architectural frame, because it's here, it's also softly colored, right, with all these Renaissance detail. But then if you look at the image, the center image itself, of course, again, you have hospitalities. She's welcoming you. This woman, there's flowers on the steps as well. There's 2 steps at the bottom with all these beautiful flowers on it. But then look higher up, you also see the parquet floor. So it has this geometry of the wood, the inlay wood that is, pulling you back into the depth. But then you see from the posture of the woman depicted, she's opening this curtain for you. And then you realize that actually a similar image to what we've seen just before, peonies and peacocks, right, are embroidered here on this tapestry that actually was owned by the Bliss family. And here this woman is seemingly like pushing open this curtain to invite you into the house. And there you can even travel further inside. So there's quite a bit of illusionistic depth to this depiction that makes it super sophisticated. Yeah. Now I'm going to show you some of Tiffany's windows. Now we'll go back in time. This is back, it's 1878 actually, that he created this window here for his own home on 26th Street. So he's clearly still experimenting with it here. This is all at the beginnings where it's still very flat, his windows, but this window is like so yum. It's so rustic. It's so energetic. It looks almost like abstract expressionist painting to me. Like this, there's something raw, like a cut through geological layers, and it actually does have gems. You see, there's like solid gems incorporated into this window here, so that you want to reach out and touch it, really run your hand over it. So here it was also, like I said, as part of this American aesthetic movement, his interior was chock full of decorative objects that he brought home from all sorts of travels. And so it was a very richly, densely decorated space. So was then this second home of his, which was actually, the building was built by Stanford White for his parents. Charles Tiffany commissioned it for Madison Avenue and 72nd Street, but it's also lost. So there's only these black and white photographs of the interior, but a photograph of a window that he designed. So here, this is more decorative, very, finely planned window that was placed in the ballroom, and it's called the butterfly window. So the butterflies are not apparent right away. But if you look closer at the center, maybe you can see it more clearly. There is like these orange, yellow, orange, ochre kind of tones that actually have gold foil as a backing. And there's these 3 circular motifs that they remind me of like paper balloons, like lampshade, like paper lampions for outside. But look at like this little swirl in the center. They are actually, when you look closer, you can make out all these different butterflies, right? Like as if it was a swarm of butterflies in the center. But even further out, the more you look at the shapes, that make up this window, you can you realize more and more different butterflies here. But it's abstracted. It's very decorative. It's very flat. It's also almost like a butterfly cut. Just, if you take out the swirl in the middle, it's very symmetrical. Otherwise, this window. Yeah. So it's still flat also here in the 7th Regiment Armory, which you can visit. It's on Park Avenue. And here he worked together with a company that he had founded. So both of these artists work very much in the fashion of what was called the American Renaissance, right? Because artists worked together in teams. So La Farge and Tiffany both worked very much with Stanford White, with McKim, Mead and White. They worked with artists, but here this is actually Tiffany's company, that included Coleman, who was the painter, Lockwood DeForest, who was specialized in woodwork, and then Wheeler, who did patterns of wallpapers and fabric design. And they all together, this company altogether, they created the interior, two interiors here at the 7th Regiment Armory. So Tiffany himself, he created the window here, still totally flat. It has these green bluish kind of hues, very geometric kind of patterns surrounding the here the veterans room. And he also created this blue turquoise tile that surrounds the fireplace. So yes, these photographs are beautiful because it was just restored by Herzog and de Meuron. So it's an interior that's still there, and you can still visit it. So that's kind of cool. Here I'm showing you, this doesn't exist anymore, but I thought like in this significant year of this election year, it might be cool to note that President Arthur actually hired or commissioned Tiffany to create glasswork for the White House. And so you can see this is still pretty flat, decorative. It has not the landscapes yet that we will see in a short while. But Teddy Roosevelt then in 1902 found this to be outdated and had it removed. But for 20 years, at least, Tiffany's artwork and opalescent glassworks decorated here the White House in Washington, D.C. even. Yeah. It's very hard to choose like what to include in this talk, but I found I wanted to include this work here because I thought it was very beautiful. It stands out a little bit as a theme here of this Native American princess. And it's a window that you can see in St. Louis at the County Heritage and Arts Center. So it was commissioned for the city of Duluth originally, and the designer was Anne Vanderlip Weston. So both artists, had studios and teams that they worked together with, and Tiffany especially had many artists who actually designed windows. So not only executed his designs, but worked very independently and did their own designs. But the name, he would put his signature. If it came out of his studio, it would still have his signature. So I found this to be a most beautiful window, very different in its subdued tones. Like it has a night landscape here. So you will see how his windows are really very three-dimensional. But the figure here, this princess, which is a literary figure, so based on the Longfellow poem of the Song of Hiawatha, and the princess is here placed in front of the waterfall, but she has the moon is shining like through this cloudy sky, and it's so very, very moody and beautiful, and has like different symbolic objects like the feathers and jewelry on both sides, right? It is said that the face itself, because the face stands out as being very sensitively rendered, and that it was apparently painted by Tiffany himself here in this case. So this is a very remarkable window, I find. But here now I wanted to show you his landscape windows, because that's really where he becomes the most revolutionary. Stained glass, traditionally, like specifically the Christian, religious glass windows, they did not have or depict landscapes so much. And he's really working on that. So here he's creating these painterly visions of like views out through a trellis out into like this beautiful bay, right? That could be Oyster Bay. Sometimes it's interpreted as Oyster Bay because that was the location of his own home, right? But he executed it actually for William and Belle Skinner, who lived in Massachusetts in Holyoke. So I have a little picture here of their home, Wisteria Hurst and Belle Skinner here. So I love how there is like this trellis that of course is functional also because it holds the window panes in place, but it also gives you the impression as if you are in that space in between inside and outside, maybe in a winter garden or on or on a porch, and you have the wisteria kind of falling down, like drooping down in front of you, so creating this beautiful flowy kind of pattern, all these different shades of purples and blues and whites and green. And then below it you have this view out into the distance and onto these hills, which is kept very simple and very meditative. Like, it reminds almost of like a Rothko, of like this idea of the sublime, like the romantic sublime a little bit, and reminds of the this statement that the sky is the chief organ of sentiment, right? And you can kind of, maybe, I don't know, maybe you can share that, you're looking at these soft hues in the sky here, and imagine just like living with this window must be most peaceful, for sure. Much busier window is this one here. It's also framed by a Gothic window frame. So if you think of like stained glass coming from the tradition of the Gothic, right, that opens up the walls and has like this very filigree pattern to the glass, to the window frame itself. Here, this window was housed in the Melchior Belzuver home in Irving-on-Hudson. And do you see in the little inset picture here, that was kind of a medieval style building, right? And so it had this framework, and it seems very different that way. But I love how he chose to depict like these hollyoaks that grow up, right? Very vertical kind of plants with their beautiful blossoms and leaves, and they so perfectly match like these vertical openings of the window, with the tree filling out the more rose, or circular openings at the top, and then in the center again you have this view out into the distance across the water and the hills, and these very finely depicted sky with all its different shades of blue. Yeah. So here again feels like you're in like a porch kind of setting in between inside and outside. Yeah. So I have a close and a distance. Mhm. The window was designed by Agnes Northrop, who was also one of the chief artists working in this Tiffany studios. And she also did this beautiful watercolor, very detailed drawing for another window that I will show you in 1 minute, which has the theme of a fall landscape, right, with this waterfall. It was designed or commissioned by Mr. Towle for his mansion in Boston, but unfortunately he died before it was finished, so it was never set actually into this window that you can see in the little inset there. But it was, so it lives now in the Metropolitan Museum. That's where it's always been. But it's a most intricate, most painterly vision of this fall landscape, with really very naturalistically rendered different trees. You can make out the birch tree on the left side especially, right? And then this the water takes you all the way to the distance. You can see, if you follow the waterfall back up those different pools, and rocks, you can go all the way back to the peak of this of the mountain in the back, where the sunlight glows around the silhouette of this mountain peak. And here he really used like all these different textured glasses that I introduced to you in the beginning. And here's more of a close-up, so you can have these there. You can see like the streamlined glasses, the modeled glass, so it has like the circular motifs. If you look at the bottom right, for instance, that makes you think of like sunlight floating through the foliage of the trees onto these rocks. You have the streamlined glass, the blue glass, that makes you understand here there's water running, it's falling down the waterfall, it's floating here in the pool, horizontally, and then vertically further down. You can have a sense of where the sunlight streams through the rocks, with all the different shades, and Here you have a close-up of the trees themselves, where he frames all these different leaves, and they have a huge variety of different shades, you know, the little more lighter birch tree on the left and the darker tree in its browns on the right side, and then the water, the blue water reflecting even on the tree trunks further in the distance. And so it really holds your interest for a very long time. And again, imagine like living with this kind of window with the sun outside, you know, shining differently every day depending on the weather, on the season, on the time of day. And so that it would always be so different and interesting and moving, actually, right? There would be movement because the clouds move, and so it would feel like it's alive. Yeah, ecclesiastical windows have a bit of a different interest, right? Because here they're set in a spiritual interior. And what is really interesting to mention is that all of these windows are actually memorial windows. So they are set inside different, you know, churches or temples, but they were commissioned by private people as memorials for their deceased friends or family, right? So here, you know, maybe it takes you back. It's very similar kind of to the window that we saw in the Vanderbilt mansions also. It's also quite large and it's very complex. And here, though, instead of hospitalitas and prosperity, right, you see in memoriam. So the words, of course, here, the interest is to think of more, you know, not your wealth on earth or your success on earth, but more, you know, your memory and your eternal life, your life, you know, past earthly existences, even though here it addresses that too, because there is the angel called help at the bottom, right? In between the figure dressed in green that depicts need, right? Like our, you know, our need for material help, right? Do you see how the figure has like a bowl, you know, so maybe in need of food? And the figure on the other side is called sorrow, so more in need of help, you know, of um because she of help because she's and support because she's mourning or representing the mourning. On the top you have, you know, the casket in all its glory, though it's light, it's golden, it shines with all these jewel glass. There's actually a close-up of it here so you can see it better, right? So it says alpha omega and it says in memoriam, and but it's lifted, it's light, it's like lifting up towards the heavens, and it's accompanied here by these very, very beautiful, youthful praying angels that surround it. So again, like imagine here there's the light hitting this image and how it would shimmer in all these different facets. um that's a close-up here of the angel of help. Yeah, and this is the watercolor that John La Farge executed, you know, to describe all the different, you know, the details that he wanted to be expressed in this window. Mhm. And this window here, he also, that was one of his major commissions for John La Farge, was Trinity Church in Boston, designed by Richardson. So it was one of the most important buildings of its time. And he created several windows for this church, but the one that drew my attention the most is here, the New Jerusalem window. I love its complexity. It's almost Baroque in the way, like these figures here, they're not standing still, but there's like a whole swirl of these figures, how they fit into the snitch. On top is architecture here again, but it's very gem-like. It has like these purples and pinks, and here depicts the New Jerusalem. And it's based on a biblical quote on the Revelation. Actually, you can see St. John at the bottom, all the way at the bottom of the paint of this window, with his, you know, writing, you know, the revelation down into his book. And the main quote here is, John saw the holy city of Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And there, of course, you see this figure, right, dressed in white like a bride, with the crown also shiny, coming out. So, you know, Jerusalem as architectural setting, but then also as the bride accompanied by these angels. And you can see the main angel, the huge winged angel in the center, by its gesture with its two hand connecting Saint John with his vision, right? So he's pointing down to Saint John, but he's also pointing up towards the vision that he's describing here in his scriptures. And there's some close-ups here where you can see the sparkly New Jerusalem, the architecture of it, and a close-up of the bride in its white garb and the accompanying angel, very painterly sheets of glass and very softly depicted faces. Also there you can see the scripture. Yeah. Another window that is quite interesting in this church is the presentation of the Virgin, it's called, right? So here actually it says 1 p.m. is the time that you should go, because then it's perfectly lit, and then the light shines behind the young Virgin, right? You can see this yellow orange kind of glass, right? And you can imagine it just glow. Again, here, look at the architecture, how complex it is in this window, right? You have, if you start at the bottom, you can see the angel with its instruments sitting on a step, right? On these steps, you move up, then you have kind of a sarcophagus with the scripture in green, with the plaque in green. And then you have columns on the side, like you have this triangular entablature. In the back behind the Virgin, you have this brick wall, you have steps that she's walking up towards the right. And then, you know, the arch on top of it. So in terms of architectural setting and architectural space, it is quite complex and interesting. So what is this? Where does this image come from? It is actually based on a painting by Titian, Presentation of the Virgin, right? So I'm showing you the painting here where you can see the young Virgin Mary going up these huge steps towards the temple. You know, since she's, you know, a young Jewish girl, she's being presented to the temple here. And this was actually the favorite painting or favorite artwork to Julia Appleton, who was her married name. You know, she was married to the architect Charles Follen McKim, but she died tragically very young during childbirth. And so here it's a memorial window for this young woman, Julia, right? And La Farge chose this painting as inspiration. And so here it's transformed into this idea of, this young girl may be looking at it as Julia Appleton being, approaching heaven, right? Like entering heaven or making that progression towards heaven. So it's very, it's very, very, very thoughtful and meaningful kind of connections. There you can see a close-up of this beautiful angel, a very thoughtful posture and all these different hues of red on its on the clothing. And then you can see the hand of God kind of reaching down, and you see an iris, the flower of the iris in this semicircular window, which is also very symbolic, the iris for the connection between earth and heaven. So you can see that. We will see that again. Yes. Just quickly here, if you come to Manhattan, you can visit the Judson Memorial Church and find lots of windows designed by John La Farge that also include another depiction here of the young Virgin as a memorial window. And then there's also circular memorial windows where here he took inspiration from a Renaissance artist, Milozzo da Forlì, in this, again, like an angel playing a lute, and chose that as the depiction for his memorial window. So he's very, very well versed in Christian iconography and really has a lot of knowledge to tap into. Also in Manhattan, you can visit here the Church of the Transfiguration, the little church around the corner on 29th Street, which I find a super interesting window here, memorial window for the actor Edwin Booth, who is known as a Shakespearean actor. And so I put a photograph here of the actor, so because it's a bit similar, you can recognize him for sure, right? I find the setting again interesting because it could be so many different things. At the bottom, it does look more like it looks like a shrine, like like a mausoleum, maybe the bottom part of it, right? The top where he's seated could be a lot of things. It could be like a cemetery. It could be it could be like a garden, like an outside, like a porch. You could see, you could see partially architecture, but you could also see a tree in the back, but then there's also drapery. So it could also very well be a stage, right? He could be performing at that moment, right? Looking very pensive, reflective. And I find that intriguing also to see how, because it's in a church setting, to think here of the Shakespearean writing or philosophies kind of elevated to almost a religious level, right? Or like it has like that, the depth for sure. Yeah. So this is a beautiful window. The other John La Farge window, the last one I'm showing you, is here of St. Paul's Chapel at Columbia University. And unfortunately, I couldn't find a better image of it, but I'm hoping that you can imagine here what I want to show you. I'm hoping also that you do end up going someday. But there's 3 windows here, and you have to kind of look through the 3 of them simultaneously to understand again, like his vision of this illusion of architecture, right, in the back of it, right? You can see like this whole porch and almost like the Acropolis in Athens all the way in the back. Do you see like there's the mount with the temple all the way in the back? And you can see here the apostles and philosophers sitting on these big steps, on these big marble steps. So you understand that he wants you to think of here outside this church, this vision of the actual apostle St. Paul. Yeah. So it's very cleverly designed. And yeah. Hard choice now for Tiffany. Tiffany is such a prolific artist, and there are so many Tiffany windows to be found, in churches and temples throughout the U.S. So it was hard to pick. I picked the ones that focus on landscape because that is really his specialty. That's his genius. This is where he's most innovative. So here's a depiction of this very, very youthful Christ, but in this very interesting nighttime landscape. Do you see? You can see like the setting sun all the way in the back that kind of echoes his halo, and a very mysterious kind of light, maybe the moon or like in the back of this tree. And so the lighting and the moodiness here is really very extraordinary, and he's praying himself, lifting his hands and praying, right? So it's unusual also, a depiction of Christ associated with darkness, because he's really associated with the sun and with light usually, but it's here based or inspired by this then very popular painting by William Holman Hunt called The Light of the World, where here Christ is holding a lantern. So it's clearly a night picture, right? Christ is holding a lantern and he's knocking on a door. Knocking on a door that hasn't been opened in a long time, because you can see vines and weeds covering it or in front of it, right? So here the thinking or the symbolism is that he's really knocking on the door of your heart, right? Trying to find entrance and find a way into your heart. It's a very popular symbol, and there are many, many depictions of Christ knocking at the door that you can find in churches, and it was part of Tiffany's repertoire. But he translated it here into a daylight setting, because apparently Americans really preferred the daylight setting to this more moody, dark, nighttime image. And so here he's knocking at the door, but it's a beautiful daylight kind of landscape around it. So this is at the West End Collegiate Church. The youthfulness and also inclusion of children is very popular at this time. If you think of people commissioning memorial windows, definitely there's, you know, higher child mortality at this time, but there's also something that people enjoyed seeing, like these pleasant, youthful images and inclusion of children. But you can see here in both of these examples that I'm showing you, the very interesting nature nature elements. So on the left side, you can see Christ actually looking out into the light, into a more abstract landscape here, very, you know, very, that recedes pretty far into the into the depth. And on the right side, it's kind of like a courtyard setting. Maybe you can see also the wine growing around this arch here, and him talking to these children. Yeah. And oh yes, the designer here is actually Clara Bird, who also did children book designs. So she had a whole career for that. Yeah. And here, do you see, here's Christ in a more exotic kind of setting. Seems very much like an Easter image, I guess, because there's, you know, there is symbolism to all these plants, and the palms, you know, are, you know, relate to Palm Sunday. There's also the white lilies, right? The purity of the lilies, like the Easter lilies. So this, I don't know, it reminds me very mostly of Easter, but it's beautiful, you know, beautiful, luscious landscape. And it really is very romantic also, in the sense of romanticism, you know, that you do find your God, that you can find your God in nature. We'll get to it even more. So here's a very interesting, to me, like the Old Testament scene here at the Marble Collegiate Church of Moses and the burning bush. And I find that very interesting, because you can see already from the gesture of Moses, he has his arm up against his head, right? Because he's blinded by these leaping white kind of flames that lash out at him from the right side, and mirror kind of his beautiful white beard and his veil also. And he's standing on this path, like he's so, you know, so shocked by this symbolic presence of God. He dropped his cane. It's on the walkway below his feet. And then you can see the flock of sheep surrounding him in the back. And you can look far into the distance on the left behind his raised arm. You can see further into the distance. So here, Tiffany created quite complex, luscious, but also very, very dynamic landscape here. For temples, you know, for Jewish temples where there's no interest in figurative depiction, here it's a similar theme, right? It also relates to Moses, and Moses meeting God as he's receiving the 10 commandments, right? So it's based here on the scriptures. And the quote, "The glory of the Lord was like unto devouring fire upon the mount," right? So here it's like this volcano erupting. So no figure depicted, but the presence of God is definitely, you know, can be felt here. Imagine it with the sunlight pouring through this glass, right? And then really moving here, these window panes that depict the fire and the lava and the smoke further up, the clouds in the back, and then these busy, you know, the rocks and the lava kind of floating down on the side of the rock. Like, it must, you know, it is definitely a great spectacle to see this, you know, window live and activated by the actual sunlight. And so, you know, so Jewish temples as well as Protestant churches really were gravitated to Tiffany and his landscape depictions, because they were not interested in, you know, figurative depictions, or depictions of saints, for instance. And so here in Brooklyn, you have so many Protestant churches, and this is one I had shown you. Like a detail of it before, of the background with the with the speckled glass that really depicts very well the foliage, the inside of the forest. So here you're like by a stream, you find yourself by a stream inside a forest, and there's also a deer. Do you see at the bottom to the right, you can see a deer, and it's drinking water from that stream. So even though here, it could be seen just like a nature, like a nature scene, like a really like like a landscape painting, I want to say. But there is symbolism to that also. I'm including here on the left side a Roman mosaic where you can see these two deer also drinking from a stream. And so here, this relates very much to baptism, right? Or to purification. So the symbolism of, the deer first devouring a snake, right? That stands for the devil or for sin, and then purifying by drinking this pure water, the water of this stream. So imagine also that, of course, here people would look at these windows, in connection with music, with the ecclesiastic music and the preaching, and so understand the symbolism quite well. This one is more traditional to me because it's very, very romantic. It's very picture book romantic. So here the frame, is already Gothic. It has this pointy Gothic arch and the columns on both sides, and then you're looking through this, illusion of a Gothic window, within the Gothic window, onto ruins, right? Gothic ruins in the back. So you can see here the image, of an old church, falling apart, which reminds you, of course, of death, and our limited time here on earth. But then in the back, you can see this illuminated, beautiful landscape, the rolling hills and the water and the sunshine all the way in the back, right? So here, the landscapes and especially the water, is, to be interpreted in religious ways. It has a lot to do, here with Caspar David Friedrich, very prominent German artist. I wanted, came to mind because here he's just like throwing all the symbolism, fourfold at you. There's the ruins of the Gothic church. There's a cemetery. There's wintertime, and there is dying trees. So you definitely understand what he wants to tell you here about, your limited time on earth. But then in this church here on Henry Street, you also have a second window that again has the stream, right? A stream. It has fresh flowers on the front. It also has evergreen trees. Do you see, like in the middle ground, and then the bright light of the sun in the background. So here, the water that we already encountered in the previously in the fall landscape within the church setting, here it has definitely the meaning of like the river of life, the flow of life, right? But also eternal life, because here nature is forever rejuvenating, right? Like the nature in itself is constantly rejuvenating. And so it also brings to mind the idea of eternal life. Yeah. Here's another most wonderful, or a pair of most wonderful painterly windows here, sunset in autumn woods, right? Where you have in both of these windows, the waterfalls and the stream that goes far, far, far into the back. But you have these very painterly birch trees again with their wonderful bark, and the evergreen tree further in the back, all these different variations of glass that really make this, I find, extremely painterly, this window here. Yeah. And here, this is my last example here for you. A more quiet, simple kind of composition. A memorial to the Frank family. This was actually installed in a mausoleum in the cemetery. And here you have these irises, right? These beautiful purple irises. I have a close up. I think it's from a different window, though it's not exactly the a detail from this larger painting glass. But the irises that connect the earthly realm with the heavenly realm. And then you have this beautiful magnolia tree also. The magnolia represents more like beauty and nobility, and it's also and purity because it's white, right? White like the lily. And so it's all the way up there in the heavenly realm. So you have the purple, more deeper color at the bottom and these white blossoms on the top. And then you have like again this deep, deep view into the distance and here horizontal clouds in the sky. But it really is quite impactful. And you can imagine like here, sitting in this in this original interior with music, with the organ music playing, maybe listening to a sermon, and how this must be most impactful. Yeah. So two really amazing artists. I hope that you enjoyed our journey here. I hope that it inspired you to either Google more into their work, find out all these beautiful examples, that the wealth of their exploration here of stained glass. And I'm hoping that you also go out and find some of these windows in their original setting where they, that they were conceived for, and get to enjoy actual sunlight shining through this glass and really bringing it alive and making it move and move you. And I thank you very much for joining me today. And I hope I see you soon on another journey. And I wish you all the way very, very best for this new year of 2021. Thank you.